Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning. My name is Jacob Kurtzer, and I'm the Interim Director with the CSIS Humanitarian Agenda. On behalf of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Global Food Security Program, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this discussion today. The Central Sahelian countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are experiencing rapidly increasing displacement and food insecurity, alongside rising insurgent violence and now heavy flooding. The Central Sahel has more than 1.7 million internally displaced persons, with almost 7.5 million people in the three countries facing severe food insecurity. As the needs in the Sahel grow, humanitarian assistance is impeded by an acute funding shortage and a worsening security situation. Just this weekend, our colleagues at Refugees International put out a report saying that security funding is almost 4 times the amount of humanitarian funding. And although they receive support from international entities such as the G5 Sahel Force and the French Operation Barkhane, the Sahelian governments have struggled to clamp down on the violence from non-state armed groups and have committed their own atrocities in the process. State militaries have also complicated humanitarian access by limiting the mobility of humanitarian agencies and requiring armed escorts during aid provision. Long-term solutions are needed to address the underlying governance issues, but in the short term, enhanced humanitarian access is necessary for ameliorating the pressing needs. Before beginning today's discussion, I'd like to introduce our moderator and panelists. We're very grateful to have Caitlin Welsh moderate today's conversation. Caitlin is the director of the CSIS Global Food Security Program and has over a decade of experience working in the US government, including most recently as director of global economic engagement in the National Security Council and National Economic Council. We are honored to be joined by Valerie Guarnieri, the Assistant Executive Director of the Nobel Peace Prize winning UN World Food Program. Thank you, Valerie, for sharing your time with us this morning. We're also grateful to be joined by Moussa Dominique Bangre, the Mali country representative for Catholic Relief Services. Although today is a virtual event, we would like to have an interactive discussion. So please feel free to submit questions during the webinar to the moderator and speakers using the Q&A function. And now I'd like to turn it over to Caitlin to introduce our panelists more comprehensively and begin our discussion. Over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you very much, Jake. I'm Caitlin Welsh, Director of the Global Food Security Program at CSIS, and I'd like to join Jake in welcoming you to today's dialogue on the humanitarian crisis in the Sahel and steps we need to take to build food security, stability, and peace in the region. To speak to us about humanitarian needs in the Sahel, there are none better placed than our two guests, Valerie Guarnieri and Moussa Dominique Bangre. Valerie Guarnieri has served as Assistant Executive Director of the World Food Program since 2018. Prior to this role, she was WFP Regional Director for East and Central Africa, and she served in a variety of other positions at WFP headquarters and at regional and country offices. Before WFP, Valerie served in the US government, including USAID and in the National Security Council, and she joins us today from Rome. Moussa Dominique Bangre is Mali country representative for Catholic Relief Services, and he has worked with CRS for the better part of 30 years. In the Burkina Faso team, specializing in microfinance and overseeing CRS activities in Niger, Togo, Liberia, Burundi, and Cote d'Ivoire. He's also served in the African Development Bank, and he's been in his current position since 2018. And Bangre joins us today from Bamako. Valerie and Bangre, thank you both for making time for today's event. As many of you know, World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley was in the region in Burkina Faso and Niger just last week. We knew that our event would come on the heels of this trip to the region. What we didn't expect was that during this trip, World Food Program would be awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. For this, our heartfelt congratulations to the entire WFP family. We have a very brief video to illustrate the challenges facing the Sahel, and we'll play that video now.
Nous sommes arrivés ici le 5 janvier 2020. Bon, nous pouvons aussi, je crois que je ne sais pas exactement le nombre, mais approximativement, nous allons jusqu'à dans les 400 personnes. Femmes, vieux, hommes, et tout, ça fait 400 comme ça. Il y a eu des affrontements entre les donzos et puis, qu'on peut dire, les sasseurs et puis les djihadistes. Bon, il y a eu des violences parce qu'il y a eu même un mort. Bon, il y a eu aussi un disparu qu'on n'a même pas revu, qu'on n'a même pas vu d'abord. Donc ils nous ont menacés avec les armes à feu et nous ont dit de partir sans même rien prendre. Parce qu'ils ont emporté après nous aussi, ils ont emporté nos bétails et tout ce qu'on a laissé par derrière. Donc on nous a obligés de sortir immédiatement sans rien prendre. Nous sommes venus ici seulement les mains vides. C'est grâce au gouvernement qui nous a donné 5 tonnes de riz. C'est avec ça qu'on est en train de se débrouiller. Et puis le PAM aussi nous a donné des substances durant 2 mois.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. We'll turn to Valerie Guarnieri. Again, Valerie, thank you so much for joining us today from Rome. On Friday, we and you at the same time learned that World Food Program was awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. So again, congratulations. In the Sahel, can you explain to us how are food and peace related?
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you for your warm words. We are just thrilled and so very honored by the award of the Nobel Peace Prize, and we're humbled by the recognition that brings to our work with partners fighting hunger around the world, but also the way in which it highlights and puts a spotlight on that really essential and critical link between hunger and conflict, and the absolute necessity that we break that chain, and that chain between hunger and conflict. Hunger, both as a cause of conflict and as a very direct consequence of it, is very much alive in the Central Sahel region, and there we really see violence and insecurity and conflict as the main driver of the crisis that's unfolding in the Central Sahel, and this is demonstrated through the closures of schools, often the forced closure of schools, the closures of markets, of health and other essential services, and the impact that has on the community. The fact that this displacement then is precipitated, and we've just seen, tremendous displacement in the region, and what that causes in terms of the separation of populations from their crops and their means of production, from their livelihoods and their ability to earn a living. And then as they move, the impact that has also on host communities who themselves are already struggling to get by. So there's no question that that peace and stability are the prerequisites for addressing the hunger situation in the Sahel, and that addressing the root causes of the crisis in the Sahel is key for stability and for a more hopeful future.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I think you did an excellent job of explaining how we see overlapping challenges right now in the Sahel, increasing violence and political instability, climate change, and now COVID-19. So with violence, for example, fatalities linked to attacks directed at civilians rose over 7,000% in Burkina Faso over the past year, over 300% in Mali, and 500% in Niger. When it comes to climate change, the average recorded temperature in the Sahel is rising 1.5 times faster than the global average. And then on top of that, we have COVID-19. So can you tell us a bit about how we see these challenges compounding each other in the region?
Absolutely. We're really seeing these 3 C's of conflict, of climate, and of COVID coming together in a very dangerous cocktail in the Central Sahel region. On the conflict side, just back to this issue of displacement, and displacement increasing by 300% since I was last in Burkina Faso with our executive director last in August of 2019, and then he's gone back there just a few days ago and seen these numbers rising, now more than 1 million displaced just in that country, and the violence that has led really to that direct targeting of schools, which really just not only denies children that chance for the education that is critical to their future, but also creates real instability in the communities. On climate, as you've highlighted, the Sahel region is a region where we expect to have the temperatures rising more than 1.5 times higher than global temperatures. But we also have 80% land that has been degraded, that is not available now for agricultural production. And so when we have either people displaced onto that land or the populations already living on that land unable to produce, that creates a very dangerous mix. And then with COVID, what we're finding is that it's already globally, it's affecting the most fragile countries and contexts and the most vulnerable people even more. We see that populations working in the informal sector are very much affected, loss of jobs and no safety nets to fall back on. And then here too, we're seeing that the supply side, so food availability is scarce in some areas. Food prices have gone up 15 to 25% in some parts of the countries that we're speaking about. And so that double hit of having not the money to buy the food and then the prices then rising even higher really creates these overlapping challenges. And the effort then needs to be addressing this combination of drivers that is really driving up the vulnerability of the population.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Valerie. I'd like to build on something that Jake mentioned at the outset, which is the fact that funding for humanitarian and development needs are dwarfed by funding for security and for security purposes. So of course, peace is necessary for food security, but it's not sufficient. As we've mentioned, in the Central Sahel, we have 7.4 million people experiencing severe food insecurity. 13.4 million people need humanitarian assistance. So beyond improved military intelligence and law enforcement, again, we also need strong humanitarian and development responses. So in the Sahel, two questions. How can we promote development while we're building peace? And also, how can our development efforts contribute to the peace building process?
Yeah, this is really key, and one of the components of that really becomes about resilience and how do you strengthen the resilience of the communities. In 2018, we launched an integrated resilience program across the 5 G5 countries of the Sahel, and this very much focuses on how we can ensure both in the what we do and the how we do it, that we are investing in those areas that are fundamentally precursors for peace and stability. Through this integrated resilience program, we've been able to provide dedicated support in 5 countries over a 5-year period, and 1.4 million people have been participating in it. And as a result of their participation in this, we've been able to restore 47,000 hectares of degraded land, dig 260 wells, 50 boreholes drilled, 600 ponds restored, 320,000 children who are benefiting from nutritious school meals that are grown by these communities on that degraded land, 600,000 women and children participating and benefiting from specialized nutritional assistance, and 24,000 smallholder farmers all engaged in this activity. And this is important because it's a way of working where communities themselves are involved in determining what are the assets that they need to have in place in order to be productive, in order to work peacefully within themselves and with neighboring communities. And then there's a capacity strengthening and basically a social contract building in the engagement of government, which strengthens the accountability and that critical social contract between the government at the national and local levels and the population. So a big part of this is in what you do and fundamentally addressing the core needs of the population, but also in the how you go about doing it.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. Thank you for underscoring that point, which you and I spoke about recently, which is it's not just about what WFP does, but how WFP does it. And then when it comes to resilience, this is often a term that we use very regularly, but we don't often define exactly what we mean by that. So thank you for breaking that down in terms of what you mean in the Central Sahel in specific. I have a question for you about responses that WFP is taking in rural and urban areas in these countries. Oftentimes, I think that when we think about food assistance, we'll think about bags of food produced given in rural areas, but the landscape is changing. We have a significant shift to cash-based assistance, and again, WFP working increasingly in urban areas. So, can you speak a bit about what WFP is doing in urban areas?
Absolutely, and this has really been one of the features of the global COVID response, has been that we've really had an increased vulnerability in the urban areas, and we've really had to scale up our support to countries, and the form that often takes is leveraging the cash transfers, which we have grown quite adept at providing as an organization over the past years. $2.1 billion put into the hands of our beneficiaries last year in the form of cash transfers. And then really in working with governments to see how we can help them strengthen their national social protection programs in order to both reach more people, but also to provide them with more substantial assistance. And 50 nations have asked for support in the context of the COVID pandemic from WFP to support their social protection systems. And this is the case also in the central Sahel region. We've been benefiting from support from Germany to support both rural and urban populations with increased cash transfers. And in Niger, working together with UNICEF, we have been providing cash distributions in the city of Tawa, and we are reaching and working towards reaching 600,000 people with cash transfers, including in urban areas. So these really are tools that we can bring to bear in supporting communities and in supporting nations by putting in place assistance that provides ad hoc support now, but fundamentally strengthens the system for providing that predictable support into the future.
Thank you for that. And you said it sounds like it was worldwide 2.1 billion in cash assistance, not million, which is remarkable.
Yeah, 2.1 billion last year, and we're on track to provide similar, if not higher levels this year.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Last question before we turn to Mr. Bangre is about humanitarian access. And I'm wondering if you can speak about the challenge of humanitarian access in the Central Sahel and what WFP is doing to improve humanitarian access.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question, because, you know, all the work when we're talking either about providing emergency food or cash assistance or about building resilience, it fundamentally only works if we can have access to the populations where we serve. And that's access by WFP and also the many partner organizations that we work with. And we find time and time again, as we're finding right now in the northern Sahel region of Burkina, that when we don't have access, we see tragic spikes in food insecurity, and there even a risk of famine. And in order to ensure that access, it's really critical that we are perceived and seen as neutral by the communities that we work in. We have to preserve humanitarian space and ensure civil military coordination. This is lessons we've learned from around the world that we're applying now in the Central Sahel region. This direct targeting of humanitarian workers and humanitarian action has to stop. Clearly, that's a problem with the armed groups that operate with impunity. But this issue of neutrality really requires also that governments understand and respect that, so that we're able to access the population. So, you know, even things that, you know, may seem practical, like armed escorts in the face of rising insecurity, these can really have tragic consequences on how we're perceived by the population, and are really to be avoided at any cost because of the risks that they then put to the humanitarian action. I would say that, you know, the last point is that there are some lessons that we can learn from our important work on resilience in this regard as well. And that's that to get access, we need to have that real understanding of the context that we are working in, so that we can be ensuring that conflict sensitivity in our plans and in our actions. And we fundamentally need to have trust with the communities and among the communities, so that they themselves both perceive and are actively involved in ensuring the protection, both of those who come in to support them, but also the assets that they create and build.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you for outlining not only what WFP is doing, but what partners are doing and can do better to improve humanitarian access. So thank you again. We'll turn to you again in our Q&A session. Right now, I'd like to turn to Moussa Dominique Bangre. Mr. Bangre, good afternoon in Bamako.
Good afternoon, Caitlin.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much. My first question is related to COVID-19, in the sense that COVID-19 is preventing so many of us from being able to travel and see the challenges that we're talking about, see these with our own eyes. So to start off, can we take a moment and hear from you what you're seeing in Mali? And if you had a chance to travel to Burkina Faso and Niger, what you've seen there recently as well?
No, thank you so much for this question. Yeah, the COVID-19 situation in Mali, although not that devastating like in Europe or in the US, it is there. But at CRS, we have taken all the measures, the precaution measures with our partners to continue to implement our activities in the field. I would say travel to Burkina or to the neighboring country require COVID test and probably laissez-passer from your embassy. But one important impact of the COVID-19 in Mali is that because of the government measures that we needed to follow, and because also of WHO and CRS provided measures, we in the field, we are obliged, for instance, to adjust our activities, making sure that we do not have large gathering, and making sure that we have appropriate social distancing and wearing masks and protecting our partners and also the beneficiaries. Another impact of the COVID-19 is that, as you know, in Mali, Burkina, and Niger, but principally in Mali, families are seeing a reduction of remittances. You know that in Mali, several people have their parents living in Europe, but since the COVID has affected badly Europe and the US, at least 37% of households are observing a reduction in remittance revenue.
Thank you so much, Bangre. This builds on reporting that WFP has done throughout the year about the impacts of losses in reductions in remittances and losses in jobs and wages, the impact of those on food insecurity. So thank you for making note of that and how you're seeing that in the region. When you and I spoke the other day, we talked about the rapid response mechanism. CRS, of course, leads USAID's rapid response mechanism for Mali. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about that mechanism and some efficiencies you've been able to achieve recently.
No, the rapid response mechanism is one of our flagship projects in Mali. As you know, this project is funded by USAID for $20 million to go from 2016 to 2022. And also, as you know, FY20 has been a challenging year in Mali because in addition to the security situation that we have to deal with, the access issues in the field, we have the COVID situation also that we had to deal with. But CRS and its partners, we have been able to take all the necessary measures and to provide life-saving support, emergency support to the populations in the field. In FY20, we have been able to conduct 41 emergency responses and reaching out to over 100,000 populations in Mopti, in Tombouctou, in Gao, in Menaka, and in most of the highly insecure places. Now, we have been able to do that because we have been working with partners. And we have been working with partners. We have been building their capacity, building also their organizational capacity, but also doing accompaniment. That is transferring them the fund, assisting them, and phasing out our assistance gradually in order for them to take over later on. I mean, the rapid response system is simple. You have the alert, and then the alert is followed by the rapid assessment, and the rapid assessment is followed by the intervention. There is a coordination mechanism in Mali whereby you have OSHA, you have the other RRM actors, and you have CRS and its partners. One thing that I really want to mention is that CRS is actually the co-lead of the RRM in Mali. We are co-leading the RRM in Mali with NRC. Something that I am really proud to report is that, you see, we made some improvement over the years and over time. For instance, our the timely response. We went from 34 days in 2017 in 2017, and today we are at 19 days timeline, meaning that from the alert to the intervention, we have improved our systems, our procurement systems, and everything to bring it back from 34 days to 19 days. And we are hoping that we'll continuously improve our system. And in FY21, we hope we'll be at around 17 days.
Thank you, Bangre. That would be incredibly impressive. That would be a 50% reduction in the response time within 4 years, if you were to achieve that. I'd actually like to dig into this a little bit. I'm curious to know what needs to happen for you to reduce that response time even further, because again, that's a remarkable reduction we've seen in a few years, but also, as we know, a day and several days can mean it can mean saving a life or saving lives for those affected. So is it a matter of improving humanitarian access, as Valerie spoke about? Are there other things that need to happen to reduce that response time?
Yes, what we need to do is to continue building our partners' capacity. For instance, the partners are doing the rapid assessment and making sure that they are quick in doing that. And we also want to make sure that we reinforce our communication between CRS and its partner when it comes to security issues, because this is going to improve the access of an easier access to the communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to build on something that you mentioned just a few minutes earlier about capacity building of local partners. Again, just like the term resilience, I think can be, we can overuse it and not always define exactly what we mean by building resilience. Same thing with capacity building. I think that we're often guilty of not defining exactly what we mean in each context. So when it comes to the local partners that you're working with, what are the very specific things that you think donors need to do to build capacity of local partners to then reduce response time under the rapid response mechanism?
Thank you so much. This is an important question. And probably maybe before I respond to that, I would say that working with local partners is the core approach of CRS in our humanitarian work. There are several benefits working with partners. It helps the acceptance by the community. It also helps to reach any beneficiary, any vulnerable person, wherever they are, using the partners' network. It also helps to handle the security, especially in this particular circumstance where insecurity is a major issue in where we are intervening. And also it helps to ensure sustainability. Now, to build our local partners' capacity, we help local partners develop new knowledge, new skills, new attitude, but we also help them strengthen their organizational and institutional capacity. And again, the last thing, and perhaps not the most important, but the most important thing is accompaniment. And this is very important. Going alongside with the partners, transferring them progressively the fundings, and assisting them progressively, and phasing out your assistance as they are growing.
Thank you. I want to dig in just a little bit further. Again, we often talk about organizational capacity and capacity building. Is there an instance you can speak of where you've been able to work with a local partner and really seen the capacity of that partner to respond? You've really seen that capacity improve? Is there a specific story you can share with us?
Yeah, our humanitarian intervention is basically based on procurement. For instance, if we are able to help them have sound procurement processes, and it is also based on the management. We help them, for instance, set up sound accounting and financial management systems. So all these are important for the partners to grow. And this is part of the institutional capacity building that I'm talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We don't often make the link between those very important aspects of running an organization and actually saving lives on the ground. So thanks for helping us make that link. I want to talk briefly before we turn to Q&A. I'd like to talk about youth and education. And as CRS has highlighted, over 50% of displaced persons in the region are children, and over 65% of the population across Bamako, Niger, and Mali are youth. And was wondering if you could speak a bit about how best to respond to children's needs, particularly when it comes to education, because again, as CRS has highlighted, over 1,000 schools have closed because of violence in the region, and schools are often the source of food for children. So when schools close, children are going hungry. Long question. I was wondering if you can help us unpack those issues.
No, thank you so much. I think that addressing the youth situation is critical in the Sahel. And as you mentioned, the population is young, and we need really to make sure that what youth need really in the Sahel is employment opportunity, having profitable business opportunities. What also youth need is social consideration and participating, having a room to participate, and with family and the community decisions. When it comes to education, one thing that I will really highlight is really providing youth quality education, and also developing vocational and professional trainings for youth in the Sahel.
Thank you. Of course, that's important, not only for food security to help people build incomes, but also for building peace, to give people viable opportunities for employment. So thank you for highlighting that. And of course, you bring personal experience to this. Would you mind speaking a bit about how your own experience with CRS programs growing up have informed the way that you work in the region today?
Thank you so much. In terms of my personal experience, as I mentioned, I am born in the Sahel, particularly in the central north of Burkina Faso. I am born in a place where there is no potable water, there is no electricity, there is no toilets, and most of the families were just eating one meal a day. Fortunately for us, in the school, there was school meal, which was supported, provided by CRS and supported by the US government. So myself, as well as the other kids, we are going to school, we are staying to school, not because of the learning, but because of the meal that we will have and that will relieve our short-term hunger. So, and by the way, the meal was very good. It was a yellow corn meal with dry milk and vegetable oil. I mean, this was an excellent meal. Now, through this education program and school canteen program, CRS has enabled millions of children in Burkina to go to school and to stay in school, and including myself, we went from going to school for the food to become prime ministers, ministers, bankers, ambassadors, and country reps like myself. So without the CRS school meal, life would have been different. So in terms of how this has impacted me, I would say that, living in such a fragile and vulnerable environment and growing in this environment, it makes me more sensitive to human suffering. And every day that I come to CRS, every day that we do an action whereby a child in the bush or in the desert, in Timbuktu or in Mopti, can smile because they have received some food, because they have received shelter. It makes me think that I am part of something that is bigger than myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As I mentioned at the outset, I think that there are no better people to be speaking about challenges facing the Sahel than you and Valerie. So thank you for sharing those stories with us. I'd like to turn to Q&A from the audience, and I'd like to invite our audience members to submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And while we're waiting for questions to come in from the audience, I'd like to follow up with a question on nutrition outcomes. This is something that you just alluded to, Mr. Brown-Gray, in the meals that you received through CRS when you were a youth in the region, but would invite you and Valerie to talk about how you're tracking nutrition outcomes of your interventions across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
I would say that in terms of nutrition, at CRS in both Mali, Niger, and Burkina, CRS has had some standard nutrition programs by which, for instance, we use the care groups, or we use the giant scoreboards to disseminate nutrition best practices in the communities. And also we use all these strategies to involve all the communities about nutrition questions in the village. So nutrition is not a matter of the women, but it is also a matter of men involvement. It is a matter of all the communities. And we have some standalone nutrition program. And I remember in Burkina, we were having like 60,000 mother-child units in our nutrition program. We also have a nutrition program, and we have integrated nutrition in our agricultural programming using, for instance, nutrition sensitive agriculture. So this is how we are addressing the nutrition in most of our programs. In our school the food are imported based in the nutritional values, but also based in what is common also in the local areas.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Valerie, is there anything you'd like to add when it comes to nutrition in the region?
No, absolutely. I think I'm glad you asked this question, because really addressing malnutrition and undernutrition are core features to our work and our focus in the Central Sahel. And we're looking there at both wasting outcomes and both preventing and treating wasting, but also stunting outcomes and trying to reduce those levels of stunting in the population. And on the wasting side, there's a real urgency to that, because we know that children who are severely malnourished are at grave risk of death. And we've seen those levels also play out and be increasing worldwide in the COVID context, with 14% increase in wasting anticipated as a result of COVID, and that's a global number. And so there's the need, and I think, as Bangri highlighted, there's the need both for the real sort of nutrition specific interventions. So starting with government systems, but supplemented as necessary to ensure that children have access to that treatment services when they're detected as wasting. But also, in order to address stunting, a real focus on healthy diets, and that starts from knowledge and sensitization, as Bangri was highlighting. It flows through to agricultural production and growing more nutritious foods, and then having those foods accessible, whether through the safety net programs like the schools and the health centers, or through and in the markets, affordable for populations to buy. So we're really tracking these different aspects in our programs in the Sahel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Valerie. Building on that, building on the importance of nutrition outcomes, I'd like to talk about an important aspect of WFP's and CRS's work, which is also investing in improved water systems and improved shelter. So of course, my main focus today is food security. That's my main interest. But we often can overlook the very critical relationship between improved water and also improved shelter to food security outcomes. So I would invite either of you or both of you to speak about those aspects of your work.
I can come in first, and I mean, perhaps speaking more about the water side of it, as that's the area where we're more directly involved. And in a situation like the Sahel, where we have such degraded landscapes, access to water is an essential part of food security, as you highlighted, and that's why our resilience package is very much focused on making better use of rainfall and improving access to water for production and for consumption purposes, by focusing on the structures, these half moons that we're helping communities build, that help a very low-tech way of harnessing water for agricultural production, but also the boreholes and the wells that need to be accessible in order to provide water for human consumption. So absolutely a key part of life in the Sahel, and fundamentally with climate change, we are seeing access to water really just degrade and disappear over time for some of these populations. So an area where much more work is necessary.
Thank you so much for highlighting that, Valerie. Bangre, anything to add?
No, yes. What I wanted to hazard is that water is a very scarce resources in the Sahel, and it is important that we build and maintain our water systems in order to be able, for instance, to have enough for agriculture and also for livestock raising. As you know, also by maintaining and building this infrastructure, we also can provide farmers with dry season market gardening or dry season production, which is also providing another coping mechanism to households to make them more resilient. In most of the Sahel countries, rain-fed agriculture has, I would say, failed to meet the needs of the growing population. And the only hope for, or the only alternative for many farmers is dry season market gardenings and other production. So water is really important in the three countries, Mali, Burkina, and Niger. And another thing that I want to add is that it is not surprising to see that in all the countries, women are going miles to have water for their families. So having this water infrastructure maintained will also reduce the workload of women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for highlighting the importance of water for crop production, livestock rearing, for sanitation, hygiene, food preparation, all the many needs of water, and also Mr. Bangre for highlighting the fact that it's often women who are disproportionately affected by water insecurity in the region. So thank you for that. I have a question here. It's about coordinating with governments. In fact, I have a few questions on that topic. So this question is, what are WFP and CRS doing to coordinate with governments and other humanitarian actors to maximize the impact of all efforts, given all the many efforts happening at the same time in the region?
in terms of coordination between World Food Program and CRS, I would say that we are coordinating at several levels. First of all, in the emergency rapid response, for instance, CRS is always coordinating with World Food Program, because what our program is providing is for 1 month ration. So we are coordinating with World Food Program to come with the additional 2 or 3 months rations for the IDPs. Another level of coordination is the school feeding. In the school feeding, CRS is coordinating with World Food Program and the government to make sure that we avoid duplications and that we do a better job on the ground in terms of providing our school canteen activities.
Good, great, thank you, Bangre. Valerie, perhaps you could speak to coordination with national governments in the region as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what I would just add is that one of the things that we leverage and benefit from is also some of the coordination that happens at the regional level. So for instance, that there's a G5 investment plan on resilience greatly facilitates our efforts at the national level to be getting the full cooperation that is necessary to carry out these activities on the ground nationally or subnationally. So it's absolutely essential to be working with governments, their involvement, their engagement, and their accountability to their populations is key. And we're not looking to substitute for that. We're looking to supplement it. And having that regional level commitment gives those extra assurances and support for that effort.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Bangre, again. I have a question here about security threats and food security, and the impacts of insecurity on hunger in the region. I'd like to remind us of what we saw in the video at the outset. So again, thank you for WFP for providing that video. It's wonderful to see the outcomes and increased agricultural production, for example, in the communities that you work in, but that also, we're also aware that could leave these communities vulnerable to extremist groups that appropriate agricultural production for their own use. So of course, it's important to address those things at the same time, but just wondering if you can talk about the impacts of violence and lack of security on food security there.
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Becky. No, you go ahead.
Okay. No, what I can say is that the increased insecurity is affecting tremendously food insecurity in the 3 countries in many ways. I think that Madam Valerie has highlighted a couple of them, because it is the insecurity that has led to the large number of displaced people in Burkina and Mali, and also in Niger. Another important thing is that the insecurity situation has reduced the number of hectares or the productivity of agriculture. Farmers are no longer able to go to their farm. For instance, if you go in Mali, in areas where it used to be the traditional basket of the country, like for instance, Bankas, Koro, I mean, access to your farm is no longer possible. And it should be the same in Burkina, in the eastern part, or in Dedougou, where the insecurity is there. Another important thing is that aside from the access to land, the access to local markets. That is very important. Because of the insecurity, there is no access to local markets in some of the areas where we are, making that selling and buying, accessing food makes it difficult. And the last thing I would say is the reduction in livestock production. And as you know, livestock is one of the basic livelihood thing of in the three countries, and the insecurity situation has reduced tremendously livestock raising because it is either stolen or there is no transhumance of pastoral land, and even where there exists, you cannot go and pasture or your cattle. So
Yeah,
all
okay.
these are affecting in one way or another food insecurity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Valerie, is there anything you'd like to add on top of Bangare's remarks? Valerie, is there anything you'd like to add? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It seems like the audio has cut out. So actually, I'm going to use this chance to ask Bangare a follow-up question. Bangare, I know that CRS is promoting a Sahel Peace Initiative, which we launched about a year ago. Can you tell us a bit about this? Because this gets exactly at this relationship between security and food security in the region.
Thank you for this question. I'm really excited about the Sahel Peace Initiative. It is an initiative that was launched by the bishops of the Catholic Church in the Sahel and CRS. And the purpose of this is really to raise awareness about the Sahel crisis. I mean, we have the impression that the story needs to be told. Many people do not know the magnitude or the gravity of what we are going through in the Sahel. Now, another objective also is to advocate for change. And another objective is to promote social cohesion and interfaith dialogue, and also mobilize humanitarian actors to save lives. Now, couple of major activities that were achieved in November 2019. There was a meeting of all the bishops, at least 13 of the bishops in the Sahel region, to discuss for the first time the Sahel crisis, and also to discuss solutions. Another activities that we have done, and we are really proud, is that we have conducted a security assessment in the three borders zone of the three countries, Mali, Burkina, Niger. And the report is available and we can share. But one thing is that one of the findings is that this insecurity is really also due to unfair distribution of wealth, of natural resources. And it is like youth, they have no other alternative than sometime being enrolled in not terrorism, but in other activities that we do not want.
Okay, thank you for that, Bangare. Hoping that Valerie, are you able to hear me again? Okay, great, excellent, good. I will ask one final question, and then I'll turn to each of you for any final remarks that you'd like to make. Final question is about refugee and the refugee crisis and IDP crisis in the region, and what WFP and CRS are able to do to help refugees and IDPs in the region. We've probably addressed that throughout the comments throughout our conversation, but if there's anything specific you'd like to note, I welcome you to do that.
Well, I would just add that, I mean, they're really ensuring that displaced populations, whether they have, whether they're internally displaced or they're displaced across borders, have access to, the basic survival needs is absolutely essential. And that's something that we clearly work very closely with UNHCR on when it comes to refugees. I was just at the UNHCR ExCom and we were speaking about the need for really globally to step up support for refugees and addressing their food security needs. And then with internally displaced populations, it's a wide range of players. And we have the tools to assist populations now on the food security side with food or with cash, depending on what the best way is to address their basic needs. There's the urgent need to enable access to some level of livelihood opportunities so that displaced populations can be able to cultivate, to work where possible, addressing a portion of their own needs, and then fundamentally the conditions for either return or resettlement remain essential, and that needs to be safe, it needs to be voluntary, and it usually needs to be supported for some level of time. Right now, access is the primary impediment to reaching displaced populations with the support that they need, and funding is the other one. The Humanitarian Response Plan and this ministerial conference that's happening next week will flag that the overall Humanitarian Response Plan requires of 1.4 billion still requires $867 million for the collective agencies in Central Sahel to do their work, including providing basic assistance to IDPs. And so this is just one of those problems that we can solve and that the world needs to step up to solve.
Okay, thank you so much, Valerie. It looks like we're actually at time, so really briefly, just 10 seconds each. Is there anything that you'd like to say that we didn't get a chance to discuss already? We'll start with Bangre.
No, I think that what I can say is just thank you again for giving CRS this opportunity to participate in this important panel. And I would like to seize this opportunity to thank USAID for all the supports that we are getting from them. I think that without their support, it would have been difficult for us to be able to reach such number of IDPs in the field. And I am really hoping and praying that this discussion will raise the awareness and in the attention of the Sahel crisis to the general public and to the donor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bangre. And Valerie, any final words?
Well, also to thank you really for putting a spotlight on the situation in the Sahel, and this conference and this discussion really highlights that there is a security challenge in the Sahel for sure, but focusing on root causes of the crisis in the Sahel is absolutely essential, both to address those urgent humanitarian needs, but also for these pathways to resilience and stability for the community. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a perfect place to end. And so I'd like to thank you, Valerie and Bangre, again for joining us today. I'd like to thank the CSIS Humanitarian Agenda and World Food Program USA for their partnership for today's event. And finally, I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in.